Hello friends and fellow flute players. Today I'd like to share with you a couple of tips that have been really helpful for me to achieve the half hole on the bottom hole of the flute. There are other half holes or places where you might cover half of the hole. Today we're going to focus specifically on this bottom hole of the flute. As you may well know, this is a very sensitive area for the flute, and so you have to be pretty accurate to get this this note. So I want to share with you a couple of things. First thing is, as you come off of the hole into the half hole from all holes closed, it really helps if you stop your breath in between. If you keep your breath going as you drag your finger across that hole, you're going to get a squeak or a squawk, much like when you first started to play the flute. This is because the holes aren't completely closed or completely open in respect. So stopping the breath until you get your position nailed down is a really good way to start this. I'll give you an example. This is without stopping my breath, and I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit to kind of give you an example of what you might be experiencing when you do the half hole. If you get that kind of high squeak, it might help if you stop your breath in between. Now, you've probably watched me do that, and there's a little trick that I've developed to help increase my accuracy in getting this. So notice when I hold my flute that my ring finger down here is flat while my other two fingers are curved. And the reason for that is I like to keep my ring finger flat. And when I go into something like the half hole, what happens is I will take my wrist here and I'll pull it toward my chest. And what that does is it allows me to pivot. On this side, I'll show you. I'm pivoting underneath of my index finger where my thumb is. It's kind of underneath my index finger. Also my middle finger there on the bottom hand. So what happens when I pull my wrist back toward my chest when I'm playing is this. I'll give you a couple of angles here. So I'm pulling, and as I pull, it's opening up half of that hole. Now, one thing you want to be careful to do is you want to make sure you come off of the hole enough. If you don't, you could still land in that territory where the flute starts to squeak a little bit. I always tell my students in workshops and private lessons to come off more than you think you should, because you can always kind of lean back into the hole if the note feels or sounds like it's a little too sharp. So then you can just kind of push back into it a little bit. I'll give you an example and I'll show you up close what I'm doing when I kind of cock my wrist up a little bit or pull it towards my chest. For me, it's become very robotic, and that works really well from coming from all holes closed to just that half hole here. So here we go. Here's another one. And from this side. Now, to come back onto the hole here, it's very much the same thing. So my ring finger is still flattened. I feel like I have a little more control when I know that it's fully extended rather than when it's curved, especially landing on top of that hole in kind of a halfway situation, such as the half hole. So one thing that I practice is lifting off and back onto the hole. And see, that ring finger is still flattened. And don't curl your pinkies under like this. That's a big no-no for me because it really limits what your muscles can do with that ring finger. So keep your pinky a little light on this one. Try not to rest it on the flute either, because that really limits what your extension of your ring finger is doing, and also limits its mobility. So kind of keep it floating in the air for this one. Keep it light. So when we come back from the top here, now you may, if you go too close to the hole, for this one, again, it's going to be really sensitive. It's going to react in kind of a squeaking manner. So I'm going to push more into the hole to give you an example of what you might be experiencing. It's really delicate. You want to make sure that you're not pushing a lot of breath into the flute, especially when doing the half hole. I know many folks avoid this altogether in songs like Amazing Grace. It shows up, and a few other places that it shows up. So a song that I encourage my students to practice to kind of put the half hole into play. You'll find it in a lot of my sheet music, but a really fun technique is the Snake Charmer. And it's a really fun song to play and put that half hole into action. And that sounds something like this. So just a couple of tips. Remember, breath. Breath is super important when you work in this area of the flute. So decrease that a little bit until you get the hang of knowing and developing that muscle memory to know exactly where to land on that half hole, whether you're coming from all holes closed into it or you're coming from above to land into. It might help to stop the breath in between. It may make your phrases and some other things feel a little disjointed, but work on bridging that gap once you have the accuracy down. Then you can keep your breath flowing like I do. Keep your breath flowing through some of that. And then the very last thing is try to keep your ring finger flat. I know that your hands, everyone's hands are a little bit different. The flute that you play is going to dictate some of this too. But try to keep that flat, because I feel like you get a little bit more accuracy with that. You have a little bit more control when a finger is fully extended rather than when it's curved or bent. The other thing that I strongly discourage is half-holing by coming up, like covering up half of the hole by sliding upwards on the flute, or bottom like this. It makes it really difficult when you get into smaller flutes when the holes are together more, or larger flutes when the holes are spaced further apart. Sometimes the way that you've known and developed that habit will be increasingly challenging in those situations. So I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions about the flute, visit me online, JonnyLipfordMusic.com. Comments are always appreciated, and shares as well. Be sure to subscribe for more tips, tutorials, cover songs, original songs, sheet music, and more. Thanks so much for your support.